The fluorescent hum of grow lights filled the laboratory, casting a bluish-white glow over rows of towering vertical gardens. Dr. Lila Arendt paced through the aisles, her tablet in hand, capturing data from sensors embedded in the soil and leaves. This was no ordinary agricultural experiment. Lila and her team were chasing a hypothesis that had earned them both acclaim and ridicule in scientific circles. The idea that ancient myths about paradisiacal gardens, like the Egyptian fields of Aaru, might hold secrets to unlocking human potential. She stopped at the consciousness array, a segment of the vertical farm where plants were arranged in seemingly nonsensical patterns. The setup had been inspired by old papyrus scrolls and digital reconstructions of crop layouts described in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Wheat, barley, and flax grew in concentric spirals and interlocking fractal shapes. The geneticist on the team, Dr. Ahmed Nazir, had spent months mapping the DNA of modern wheat to identify remnants of ancient genetic patterns, searching for what he called memory genes. "Lila, we're getting something," Ahmed's voice crackled through her earpiece. "The sensors are picking up strange electromagnetic fluctuations from Array 17. You should see this." Her heart raced as she hurried to the control center. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Ahmed, a wiry man with perpetually disheveled hair, pointed to the screen, where oscillating waves formed intricate repeating patterns. "It's resonant," Ahmed explained. "The plants aren't just growing, they're interacting. They're creating a field." Lila leaned in, mesmerized. The waves weren't random. They looked like something out of a physics textbook, a harmony of frequencies. The team had been measuring bioelectric activity in plants for years, but this was different. These waves weren't just natural byproducts of plant life, they were deliberate. "What does it mean?" asked Nora Kim, their neurobiologist. Her question hung in the air like the low hum of the grow lights. "It could mean the myth of Aaru wasn't just poetic imagery," Lila said, her voice trembling. "It might have been a literal blueprint for how to organize plants to affect consciousness." 3 days later, the team had assembled their findings. The field generated by the consciousness array didn't just affect the plants, it extended outward. Tests on volunteers showed subtle but unmistakable effects: heightened focus, a profound sense of calm, and bursts of creative thought. "Let me show you something," Ahmed said during a late-night brainstorming session. He pulled up a genetic sequence on his laptop, overlaying it with a 3D rendering of the plant arrangements from the ancient scrolls. The wheat in Array 17 carries dormant genes that reactivate in these configurations. "It's like they were designed for this." "Designed by whom?" Nora asked. "Or what?" Lila said, her mind racing. The Egyptians had attributed the fields of Aaru to the gods, a utopian afterlife reserved for the virtuous. But what if those descriptions weren't about death? What if they were about life? Life enhanced by a deep connection with the natural world. Lila decided to push the experiment further. She authorized the creation of a new array, one that expanded the Aaru-inspired patterns into a 3-dimensional design, using every axis of the vertical farm. The structure was modeled after sacred Egyptian geometry, patterns repeated in ancient temples and artifacts. The results were immediate and dramatic. Sensors picked up a stronger field, one that seemed to alter not just brain activity but heart rate and respiration. Volunteers began reporting vivid dreams, some even claiming they could recall memories from their ancestors. One night, Lila herself decided to sit in the center of the array. She closed her eyes, letting the soft rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the machinery wash over her. At first, nothing happened. But then, a wave of warmth spread through her body, followed by a cascade of images. Fields of golden wheat stretching endlessly under a brilliant sun, shadowed figures tending to them, their movements fluid and otherworldly. When she opened her eyes, tears streamed down her face. She couldn't explain what she had seen, but she knew one thing: this was only the beginning. What if the Egyptians didn't invent the fields of Aaru? Ahmed said the next day. What if they discovered them, rediscovered them maybe? What if the plants were always meant to guide us? Nora stared at him. "Guide us where?" Lila answered, her voice quiet but certain. "To what we were meant to become." The team's discovery quickly outgrew the confines of their research lab. As the news of the Aaru array spread, other scientists and institutions scrambled to understand the implications. Private investors, governments, and even fringe groups began to take notice. Some saw it as the next leap in agricultural technology, others viewed it as the key to unlocking untapped human potential. But for Lila, Ahmed, and Nora, the question wasn't about commercializing their findings. It was about understanding the deeper truth. A week later, Lila met Ahmed and Nora in the conference room, where a holographic model of the expanded array spun lazily in midair. Lila pointed to a set of nodes where the electromagnetic fields were strongest. "This pattern keeps repeating," she said. "Not just in the field's output, but in the dreams reported by volunteers. Everyone describes concentric golden rings, like ripples on a pond." Ahmed frowned, running his hand through his hair. "It's more than just patterns. The genetic markers in the wheat keep reacting to something we haven't identified. They're evolving." "Evolving how?" Nora asked. Ahmed tapped his tablet, projecting a sequence of changes in the plant's DNA. "These genes, which were dormant for thousands of years, are becoming active again. It's like they're waking up." "And that's not all," Lila said, her voice tinged with unease. "I've run the data on how the field affects people. It's not just enhancing consciousness, it's syncing it. People inside the array begin to share thoughts, feelings, even memories." "Are you saying it's creating a collective mind?" Nora asked, leaning forward. "Not quite," Lila said. "It's more like a bridge. A connection between individual minds, mediated by the plants." The room fell silent. For centuries, humanity had imagined utopias where people were united by shared understanding and empathy. Could it be that the fields of Aaru weren't just agricultural systems, but a tool for creating such a world? That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She returned to the lab and sat in the center of the expanded array, the plants towering around her like green sentinels. The hum of the field was louder now, almost melodic. Closing her eyes, she let herself sink into the rhythm of her breathing. This time, the visions were sharper, more vivid. She saw a group of figures gathered in a vast garden under a sky streaked with unfamiliar constellations. Their faces were indistinct, but their presence radiated wisdom and serenity. One figure stepped forward, holding a stalk of wheat that shimmered with an inner light. "You have found the path," the figure said, though the voice seemed to come from within her own mind. "But the path is not yours alone. It was left for you by those who came before, and it leads to those who will come after." "Who are you?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. The figure did not answer. Instead, it pointed to the horizon, where the garden seemed to dissolve into a starry expanse. As she watched, the stars rearranged themselves into patterns that mirrored the shapes of the arrays. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream had felt more real than anything she'd experienced before. And though she didn't fully understand it, one thing was clear. The fields of Aaru were more than a relic of the past. They were a message from something far greater. The following morning, Lila shared her experience with the team. Ahmed nodded grimly. "You're not the only one," he said. "Several volunteers reported similar dreams last night. Different details, but the same message. The fields are a gift, but also a responsibility." "Responsibility for what?" Nora asked. "Maybe to evolve," Lila said. "To transcend the boundaries of what we think humanity can be. But that kind of power, it could be dangerous," Nora said. "What if someone tries to use it for control instead of enlightenment?" Ahmed sighed. "That's the risk, isn't it? Every breakthrough in history has been a double-edged sword. The only question is who wields it." As the team debated, the world outside the lab was already changing. Rumors spread of corporations attempting to replicate the array, claiming it could cure mental illness, enhance intelligence, or even grant immortality. Religious leaders decried the discovery as heretical, while others embraced it as divine. Protests erupted, demanding the technology be shared with the public, or destroyed entirely. In the midst of the chaos, Lila received an encrypted message. It was a video, recorded by an elderly man in a remote desert. Behind him were rows of ancient stone pillars, each inscribed with hieroglyphs. "The fields of Aaru were not just for growing crops," the man said. "They were a doorway. But beware, what lies beyond is not for the unworthy." As the video ended, Lila's tablet buzzed with a new alert. A satellite image showed an area deep in the Sahara Desert, where patterns of ancient crop circles were faintly visible beneath the sand. They matched the configuration of the Aaru array. Lila stared at the image, her mind racing. The fields of Aaru weren't just a message or a tool. They were a map. A map to something that had been waiting for millennia. Lila stared at the satellite image, her mind oscillating between awe and trepidation. The faded outlines of the ancient crop circles formed an unmistakable map, one that pointed to a region of the Sahara where no known civilization had flourished. Ahmed and Nora, now peering over her shoulder, fell silent as the realization settled over them. "This changes everything," Ahmed finally whispered. "It's not just a map," Nora added, her voice trembling. "It's an invitation." The team wasted no time. Within 48 hours, they had secured funding for an expedition. While the public clamored for answers, Lila and her team worked in secrecy. They chartered a plane to an isolated research base near the Sahara and partnered with a local guide, Tariq, who had spent years navigating the vast, unforgiving desert. The journey to the site was grueling. Sandstorms battered their convoy, and the heat was relentless. But as they neared the coordinates, a strange energy seemed to hang in the air. Lila felt it first, a subtle vibration in her chest, as if her heartbeat were syncing with something beyond her control. Ahmed and Nora reported similar sensations. Finally, they reached the site. At first glance, it appeared to be an unremarkable stretch of desert. But as the team deployed ground-penetrating radar, the instruments lit up with activity. "Buried structures," Ahmed said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Massive ones." Tariq, standing at the edge of the group, muttered something under his breath. When Lila asked him to repeat it, he shook his head. "It's nothing," he said, his tone guarded. "Just stories my grandmother used to tell, of a cursed garden hidden beneath the sands. A place where men lost their minds." Excavation began the next day. Beneath the layers of sand, the team uncovered stone pillars arranged in the same fractal patterns as the Aaru array. The pillars were covered in hieroglyphs and strange, angular symbols that no one recognized. Nora traced her fingers over one of the carvings. This isn't just Egyptian," she said. "These symbols are older. Much older." Ahmed frowned. "Older than Egypt? That's impossible. What civilization predates the Egyptians with this level of sophistication?" Before anyone could respond, Lila called out from the center of the excavation. She had uncovered what appeared to be an entrance, a massive stone door etched with concentric circles that seemed to pulse faintly in the desert sunlight. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded. The air around the door seemed alive, charged with the same electromagnetic field they had detected in the lab. It was as if the door itself were waiting for something. That night, as the team prepared to open the entrance, Lila sat alone by the campfire, staring up at the stars. The constellations seemed different here, as though rearranged to form patterns she couldn't quite decipher. Tariq approached, his expression somber. "You should not go inside," he said. "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Lila looked at him, searching for fear in his eyes. But what she found was something deeper, reverence. "What do you know about this place?" she asked. Tariq hesitated, then sat beside her. "The stories say this was a garden of the gods, a place where they walked among men. But the gods were not kind. They tested those who entered, and those who failed were never the same." The next morning, the team activated the mechanisms to open the door. As the stone slab groaned and shifted, a rush of air escaped, a cool, fragrant breeze that carried the unmistakable scent of fresh vegetation. Beyond the door was a tunnel, its walls lined with bioluminescent plants that glowed faintly in the dim light. This shouldn't be possible," Ahmed said, his voice trembling. "These plants are alive." The team pressed forward, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, a lush garden that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. Golden stalks of wheat swayed gently despite the absence of wind, and streams of crystal-clear water wound through the landscape. But it wasn't just the beauty that captivated them. It was the feeling. The moment they stepped into the garden, their minds seemed to expand. Lila felt as though her thoughts were no longer confined to her own mind but shared among the group. Images, memories, and emotions flowed between them like an unspoken language. "This is it," Nora said, tears streaming down her face. "This is the real Aaru." As they ventured deeper, they found more evidence of the garden's purpose. Stone tablets inscribed with the same ancient symbols depicted scenes of figures standing in circles, their hands raised toward the sky. Some tablets showed wheat stalks bursting into light, while others depicted what appeared to be stars arranged in spirals. Ahmed stopped in front of one tablet, his face pale. "These aren't just rituals," he said. "They're instructions. This garden wasn't just meant to expand consciousness, it was meant to transform us." "Into what?" Lila asked, though she already knew the answer. Before Ahmed could respond, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. The golden wheat swayed violently, and a deep, resonant hum filled the chamber. The garden was awakening. And it wasn't alone. The hum grew louder, resonating in their chests like a low, persistent drumbeat. The golden wheat emitted a faint glow, pulsating in time with the vibrations. The air seemed thicker now, charged with an invisible energy that made it difficult to think clearly. Yet amidst the chaos, Lila felt a strange clarity, an undeniable connection to something vast and ancient. "What's happening?" Nora shouted, her voice trembling as she tried to steady herself. Ahmed knelt beside one of the glowing stalks, his hands shaking as he pointed at its roots. "The plants, they're not just responding. They're communicating." "Communicating with what?" Lila asked, though she feared the answer. Ahmed didn't respond immediately. His gaze was locked on the intricate root system beneath the soil. The roots weren't just tangled, they were interwoven, forming complex patterns that mirrored the fractal designs on the pillars outside. It was as if the entire garden was a living network, a single, unified organism. "They're talking to us," Ahmed finally said. "Or, testing us." Suddenly, the hum reached a crescendo, and the chamber was flooded with light. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost humanoid. The figures from Lila's dreams, the indistinct beings in the golden fields, now stood before them, their forms flickering like flames in a breeze. One figure stepped forward, its features still blurry but its presence undeniable. It spoke, though not with words. Its voice echoed in their minds, a cascade of emotions and images that conveyed meaning beyond language. "You have entered the garden," it said. "The threshold of what was, and what may yet be. But the path forward is not given. It must be earned." Lila stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Earned how?" The figure raised a hand, and the garden seemed to shift around them. The golden wheat parted, revealing a series of concentric circles etched into the ground, each circle connected by narrow pathways. At the center stood a single, towering pillar, its surface glowing with symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Step into the circle," the figure said, "and face the truth of yourselves." Lila glanced at her team. Nora looked pale but determined, while Ahmed's curiosity burned brighter than his fear. Even Tariq, who had been reluctant to enter, seemed unable to resist the pull of the garden's challenge. "Together," Lila said, her voice steady. "We do this together." The team moved cautiously into the first circle. As they crossed the threshold, the world around them dissolved. The golden fields, the glowing plants, the pillars, all of it faded, replaced by a stark void. Then the visions began. For Lila, the void filled with memories. Her childhood, her parents, her first experiments in a shabby university lab. But the memories twisted, revealing the moments she had buried, the times she had sacrificed a friendship for ambition, the times she had doubted her own work. Each memory felt like a trial, forcing her to confront not just her choices but the reasons behind them. For Ahmed, the void became a labyrinth of numbers and equations, the language he had always used to make sense of the world. But the equations wouldn't solve themselves. They demanded more, an understanding of the human lives behind the data, the consequences of his relentless pursuit of knowledge. For Nora, the void was a mirror. She saw herself as others saw her, strong, intelligent, but also distant, unwilling to let others see her vulnerabilities. The mirror cracked, and behind it, she glimpsed the connections she had neglected, the relationships she had let wither. Each of them emerged from the trial changed, their minds clearer but heavier, burdened with the weight of self-awareness. As the void faded and the golden garden returned, the figure reappeared. "You have faced the first truth," it said. The truth of the self. Now, you must face the second. The garden shifted again, and the second circle was revealed. This one was darker, its pathways lined with shadows that writhed like living things. As they stepped inside, the team felt a new presence, something cold and unyielding, a force that seemed to test their resolve. The second truth is the truth of unity, the figure said. Can you stand together, even as the shadows seek to divide you? The shadows lunged, taking forms that played on their fears. For Lila, it was the face of a colleague she had wronged. For Ahmed, it was the specter of his failures. For Nora, it was the embodiment of her deepest insecurities. The team faltered, their connections fraying under the weight of their doubts. But then Lila remembered the field's purpose, not just to expand consciousness, but to unite it. Reaching out, she grasped Nora's hand, then Ahmed's. We're stronger together, she said, her voice firm. The garden isn't testing us as individuals. It's testing us as a whole. As their hands joined, the shadows recoiled, dissolving into wisps of smoke. The circle's path lit up, guiding them toward the final trial. At the heart of the garden stood the central pillar, its glow now blinding. The figure gestured toward it. The final truth, it said. The truth of the universe. Do you wish to know it? Lila hesitated. She could feel the weight of the question, the enormity of what lay ahead. But as she looked at her team, she saw their determination mirrored in her own. Yes, she said. We're ready. The figure nodded, and the pillar began to hum, its symbols rearranging themselves into patterns too complex for human comprehension. The garden trembled, and the team was engulfed in a cascade of light. What they saw next would change the fate of humanity forever. The light engulfed them, wrapping each of their senses in a kaleidoscope of emotions, sounds, and images. Lila felt as though her mind was unraveling and reweaving itself all at once. Memories she didn't recognize flowed through her consciousness. Memories of distant stars, worlds covered in bioluminescent seas, and civilizations that spoke in frequencies rather than words. The light faded, and they found themselves standing not in the garden, but in an infinite expanse of stars. The central pillar still stood before them, but now it pulsed with the rhythm of the universe itself. The figure reappeared, its form more defined but still elusive, like a being caught between dimensions. You have faced the truths of the self and unity, it said. Now, you are ready for the truth of the universe. The fields of Aaru are not merely tools for growth but conduits for connection, between life on Earth and the greater cosmos. The figure gestured, and the stars around them began to shift. Patterns emerged, mirroring the fractal arrangements of the garden. Lila suddenly understood. The fields weren't just agricultural systems. They were signals, a universal language designed to resonate with the consciousness of all sentient life. This garden, the figure continued, is a fragment of an ancient network created by those who came before you. They planted these seeds across countless worlds, hoping to guide others toward enlightenment and unity. But the path is fraught with danger. To wield this knowledge without wisdom will bring ruin. Lila felt the weight of its words. Why now? Why show us this? Because your world stands at a crossroads, the figure replied. The choices you make now will determine whether you ascend or fall. The garden is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. Use it wisely. As the figure began to fade, the pillar pulsed one last time, releasing a burst of energy that sent Lila and her team hurtling back to the physical world. They awoke in the center of the garden, the golden wheat swaying gently around them. The chamber was silent, save for the soft trickle of water. For a moment, none of them spoke. The experience had left them shaken, but also resolute. We can't let this fall into the wrong hands, Ahmed said, breaking the silence. Nora nodded. But we can't hide it either. The garden is bigger than us. The world needs to know. Lila stood, brushing sand from her clothes. We'll share it, but on our terms. This isn't just technology. It's a legacy, one that belongs to all of humanity. As they packed their equipment, Lila glanced back at the glowing pillar. She knew their journey wasn't over. The garden had given them a glimpse of something far greater than themselves. A reminder that humanity was part of an intricate, interconnected web of life stretching across the stars. The fields of Aaru were not an end, but a beginning. And now, It was up to them to ensure the seeds of that beginning grew into something extraordinary.